everyone. You're here for the best topic of the whole conference. It's procurement. Yay!
You made it through the title.
Everybody wish they were here. Laugh a lot, play. You know, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and we're talking about procurement. So it's also funny because this is a topic that has been at this conference for multiple years. And at Digital Promise, we've done so first of all, I'm Karen Cater, CEO of Digital Promise. And we've done a lot of work primarily looking at both the supply side, the vendors and the people who make products, and connecting that with the demand side, or the people who purchase products, and trying to break it down and bring it together and rationalize it and all of that. So we've done surveys, we've done piloting of products, we've done case studies of how people select and that kind of thing. And we created a whole framework, everything from the needs assessment all the way through to the procurement, and then kind of reporting back. So there's just a lot going on in this space. This particular a little nichier topic is around decentralized procurement, but I think we probably will talk about all of it, because we have a whole hour to talk about procurement, 50 minutes. So, ready to go? All right. So, one of the things that you probably know that US K12 spending is like $700 billion annually. Okay, so that's a lot of money. It's all public money too, right? So when you think about it, it's taxpayer money. There's a lot of strings attached to it. You can't just go buy what you want just because you feel like it is part of it. And then you also have this huge responsibility of educating the next generation. And so you also don't want to just start using products willy-nilly. So there's this whole pretty complex world that has sprung up into kind of rules and regulations, and a lot of practices, and a lot of just kind of the way things have always worked, and then the way things could work. So we're going to sort of take all of that apart today. I think the average K-12 district purchases within 40 distinct product categories. So not even products, but product categories. When you think about it, it's everything from school buses to edtech products and devices, to janitorial supplies, to Xerox machines or whatever machines, not Xerox, any kind of copier machine or whatever, right? So lots of different products that people procure. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Keeping in the back of our minds that the whole reason is because we want to provide the best possible education for this generation of students, right? So it's not just about a marketplace and that kind of thing. It really is about how do we create the best possible learning environment. With that in mind, and kind of thinking also about how to create the best kind of efficiencies, productivity, effectiveness, we're going to jump straight in. So I'm going to first ask the panelists to introduce yourself and who you're with, kind of get it going. I don't need to introduce you. You can introduce yourselves. So Daniel.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. My name is Daniel Smith. I'm the general manager for the education division at Amazon Business. So a lot of you have heard of Amazon Web Services. That's a cloud computing portion of our company. That's a separate business. We're really interested at Amazon Business about the products, physical and increasingly digital, that K-12, but also higher education institutions purchase. And I just wanted to acknowledge, when we were actually preparing for this panel, the work that Karen mentioned at the beginning of this talk, and that Karen really spearheaded and had the vision for, has really been a seminal work for me and I think a lot of the people on this panel. It really laid out the blueprint of the challenges in procurement and why those challenges in K-12 procurement are interesting, because it's not obvious. Procurement is not the most, it's about right up there with insurance actuarial tables or something in terms of, but when you think about the K-12 school district in Texas, whose special education department chair needed to buy big button calculators to teach a specialized unit, and it took 45 days to purchase that thing and get it there, and it showed up, and they sat in a box for 2 years because they were late and they weren't needed anymore. Or you think about the barriers to entry that some of the very important and very necessary rules around public sector procurement create, and stifle innovation. I'm sure we'll talk about this. Stifle innovation of getting innovative new products in the hands of teachers and just educators broadly, this really does matter. And it matters from an efficacy of how the money is spent as well. So it's something that I think really impacts the edtech companies, the education product companies, the investor community, the school educator and operators. It really is a hidden problem in K-12 that I think if we can improve just a little bit and take some incremental steps on, will improve a lot of areas of education.
Excellent. So Daniel from Amazon. John.
So hi, my name is John Yu. I'm the CEO of Noodle Markets, and our product we recently relaunched as Procure K-12. Always good to say what you do. I didn't know I was going to go right after Daniel, that raspy voice. There's just no way I'm going to compete against that. So,
A radio voice.
dang, it's like, Brad Pitt, you're fine. You know, the company's mission is really simple. We're just trying to simplify purchasing for schools. So it dovetails directly with what Daniel's saying, the great work that the Digital Promise has done. That seminal piece is just, when I read it and sort of transitioning to this position, I was like, oh, so she's figured it out, and we just have to execute it.
Actually, so quickly, I'll tell you what that is since they both
Since we
referred
both
to it.
referenced it,
So,
sucked up to the monitor.
A few years ago, we did a research study funded by Gates Foundation. We did a research study. We worked with Johns Hopkins and did intensive research on both interviewing and surveying and talking with superintendents and procurement officers in schools and districts and CTOs and others, so anybody who kind of had that side of that view of the elephant, and also with technology vendors. And it was so interesting to see the different perspectives. In general, superintendents and procurement officers were kind of happy with how things were working on their side. And what do you think about the other side? Do you think they were happy with how hard it is, how long it takes, like the process, the sort of ambiguous nature of trying to find your way into a school district? So it was super interesting to see the difference in the perspectives from both the supply side and the demand side. And so that was the survey. We published a 70-some page research study. You probably won't read that, but there's also like a much more accessible executive summary that's about maybe 25 pages. And then there's an infographic that you can look at in 15 minutes and get everything you need to know. So that's all on our website under our marketplace work. So yes, thank you for mentioning that. Susan.
Hi, everybody. I am Susan Enfield, proud superintendent for Highline Public Schools, located just south of Seattle. And I am not happy with procurement, so I proudly say that. You know, just very quickly, from the K-12 perspective, procurement is a pretty onerous process for us. And the reason that it is so onerous is not actually because we are masters of bureaucracy, which K-12 systems typically are, but because we are bound by state and federal rules and regulations that are no joke. And the reality is that at the end of the day, I will not lose my job, sadly, over children not learning and becoming great productive citizens. I will lose my job over a procurement or financial mess. And so when districts, I think I want to make the case for my colleagues and I that I think that sometimes we are looked at in K-12 as wanting to cling to the status quo or not being innovative. And that's really not the case. We also have a very realistic need to be above board and make sure that we are following these processes, because I have 4 auditors in my district from the state as we speak right now. And that is a part of our reality that we have to be very, very mindful of. So happy to talk further as we.
Okay. Thanks, Susan. And Kent.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kent Freeman. I'm Chief Strategy Officer for a company called Content Group. We're a set of businesses really sort of organized around a common mission of helping content reach its destination, mostly in the book space. And interestingly, Ingram, which is a fairly large company and has spun off some technology companies, Ingram Micro and whatnot, all evolved out of our state of Tennessee textbook depository, which has been in business and continues to provide the content fulfillment to the districts, the K-12 districts in the state of Tennessee. Traditionally that's been physical fulfillment of textbooks and related materials, but increasingly we're dealing with, as you are, with with additional options, digital options, much of that complementing the physical books. And we're evolving, much like Ingram Content has evolved over the years, a lot of innovation. We're the leading print-on-demand manufacturing business now. We've got a company called VitalSource, which is, large and growing in the edtech space. And we're working now to evolve Tennessee Book because we think it is an evolutionary process. This is a conference that's focused around the digital side of things, but print remains relevant. We think it's really, we can best serve the districts and the state and the publishers and content developers that we work with in an evolutionary process.
So just for the purposes of this conversation, can you explain what a book depository is?
Sure. So we work.
Because I bet some, and how many states have them also?
So Tennessee is one of 16 states that sort of operate with an adopted kind of notion where the state is involved in the selection and adoption of textbooks. And the depository, the easiest way for you to think about it is that the content ships from, physical content ships from publishers to our facility in the state of Tennessee. The state wants to ensure that all of the districts have ready access to the materials, and so it comes into the state of Tennessee. We're able to optimize the fulfillment back out to the districts the way they want, whether they've got their own, fulfillment centers and they want to take care of getting that out to the schools, or we'll deliver it directly to the schools.
Okay, so I actually want to talk just a little bit also about this other company that I don't know if you knew you were going to talk about, is VitalSource. So I met these people from VitalSource like 20 years ago, I think, and it was such an interesting product because it basically was this concept that if you started dental school, you got a device with all your dental school materials on it from the beginning, and you used it all the way through. So you could, no matter what course you were taking, you could look back at another textbook, you could cross-reference them. Can you talk just a little bit about VitalSource and just, because that's a really interesting procurement.
I'd love to. I was fortunate enough to manage VitalSource for many years. We evolved, from that dental school model, which today in the high ed space, and K-12 has always been kind of the ultimate, this term inclusive access, that we're seeing in higher ed, but K-12 has long been that sort of model. But the dental model was built that way. By default, as a dental student at about a third of the schools in the country, you would just receive all your materials. Today, VitalSource is still very much primarily a higher ed focused company that has evolved from kind of, e-textbook, if you will, almost the paper under glass model to very much a interactive, much more dynamic kind of solution. We're powering many of the publishers' courseware models and, just evolving company. Also, much like this conference, we're in K-12 and, also into the corporate space. So kind of lifelong learning very much now, the direction for VitalSource.
One of the things that we all are talking about this conference also is personalization and how we make sure that everybody has what they need when they need it. And so I just think that's just an interesting model. If you picture starting high school or starting, sixth grade, instead of just having your little set of sixth grade materials, because you might actually be at a second grade level, or you might be at an eighth grade level, or the leveling within a niche school classroom is completely artificial. And so if you think about providing everybody what they need, individualized, kind of that's where I think we want to take this, and how does procurement work in a sort of a more fluid environment like that. But Daniel, what's going on there at Amazon? We actually are interested. What's Amazon thinking about in terms of K-12 procurement and how you can help?
Yeah, I think one of the ways we can help is by getting Amazon out of the way. And it's a great career strategy.
That'll happen. That'll happen. That great big company just ignore the.
So think about, talked about digital content. Think about the Kindle. Anyone have a Kindle reader or used a Kindle reader in the past on phone or any device? Part of the magic of it is that the technology and all the sort of infrastructure around the reading experience disappears. And it really immerses you in that experience, and there's a connection between the content and the reader. If you think about what K-12 organizations need for schools, and incredibly varied, 40 different commodity categories, you said, right? Everything from janitorial supplies to books to large capital expenditures. Amazon services about 30 of those 40 categories, things that you could ship in a box reasonably. There is a tremendous amount of necessary steps and checks and bureaucracy around buying things. 8 to 9 steps on average to get something approved in a K-12 district. Takes about 9 days on average in our study, which I think aligns with some of the stats that we have, to get a PO approved, and then another 10 for the thing to show up. This is the world that K-12 organizations are living in, and over 90% of those transactions are on paper. They're not in a system. They're literally paper going from one person to another. And that is not making the experience disappear. That's not making the ability to get the things that you need quickly, to be adaptable. Even within a given district, you might have a building that's a high free and reduced lunch school, and another one that building in that same district that isn't, and the things that those individuals need are wildly different. And so we have really created a solution that takes all of those very important compliance aspects, competition, making sure that it's the right vendor and supplier, that vendor and supplier is legal to purchase from, that the way that the item has been solicited or bid is compliant. And we want to make all of that, we can't abolish it. There's reasons why those laws are there. We're not in the business of sending superintendents out of a job or to jail. That's not our business model. The idea, though, is the idea is that those things really resolve into the background, and we solve those things invisibly. If you think about what Amazon Web Services did, we did that with infrastructure, with hardware, where it used to take 30 days and a bunch of human beings to get a server stood up, and now you swipe a credit card and it happens in 3 minutes. That's software or platform as a service. We're providing compliance, or maybe a bit more provocatively, bureaucracy as a service. That it's in the background and it sort of resolves and disappears. And the teachers, the educators, the district level persona can still buy things but still meet all those compliance requirements. And we've had a lot of success there. We went from being in about 9% of school districts to being in over 90% of them in 3 years. 650 of the largest 1,000 school districts are using Amazon Business now at district-wide. And I think it's really driven by the fact that we can take that, call it 20-day process, and 87% of our orders from the time a teacher, it's a glint in a teacher's eye at the time that arrives on their desk, 87% of those orders happen in 5 days. So it's a dramatic reduction in compliance, in the time it requires to be compliant and get stuff.
Excellent. So to kind of add to that then, John, Noodle Markets kind of started in this idea about bringing people together into a system and kind of building transparency and that kind of thing. So talk a little bit about Noodle Markets and what you're trying to accomplish in this world.
Yeah, so ProcureK12.com.
That's right, we changed your name.
The company was co-founded by John Katzman, who we all know, Tomorrow Party with John Legend. In his mind, anyone who had the opportunity to speak with him realizes he cuts at problems in many different angles. And so his approach to it was, whether you call it a marketplace or not, he was the classic, how do you remove the friction between vendor and educator, right? Like, what are the things that you need to do to accelerate that relationship so that then the right product is found? And so what are some of those things? What are the things from the vendor side? What are the things from the educator side? On the vendor side, there are some really simple things. Just out of curiosity, how many people in the audience are from the vendor side, or a product that you're trying to sell? So of the people who have your hand up, how many of you take a PO online? Right. Two, right? So, just that simple statement of, software service innovation coming from the not the edtech world, the tech world, right? Where basically you swipe your credit card and you can have a whole platform set up in 3 minutes. You can't do that in education, right? So just even like being able to inform the vendor side that there's ways to do business in education that you need to become much better at understanding, right? Like so that was one method of removing that friction. You know, on the educator side, how many of you are willing to willy-nilly sign up a pilot for a vendor from a product you've never heard of before? Very few, because in our call, you made a really great point, which was part of your responsibility is equity, right? Like you need to actually make sure that the products that are selected that go into these schools actually have efficacy and will work for all your students, right? So those are friction points that, again, the platform was really tried to, for all intents and purposes, you could have called it a simpler Yellow Pages for education, right? These models exist, right? So that was the basis of this notion. How do you like remove friction such that then these two parties can actually do business? We've all heard the phrase like, you know, if you're a hammer, you see the world as a nail, right? So I come from a marketplace background, right? Like when you were saying supply and demand, I just thought, well, that's a marketplace, right? Even though I was an econ major at undergraduate, you know, I don't draw supply-demand curves. I think marketplace, and I think that Amazon, in no short order, has really proven that the most efficient way of delivering goods and services, the most efficient way of providing the best price possible, of letting products that are quality sort of surface to the top is a marketplace. The reason why I say I see the world as I'm a hammer is because I was the former CEO of Teachers Pay Teachers, and so that was a marketplace of products created by teachers for teachers, right? So we were able to bring this model to this space. It's best kept secret that no one's ever heard of, right? So in the, how do we do this beyond just digital supplies and goods, but to the 40 different categories? So for me, it's just a no-brainer, right? Like that marketplace forces these new models for bringing the efficiency and the compliance that's necessary is the solution. Now, the hard part is partnering, I think, with schools to help them along that process. And I think it's really easy to demonize, as you were saying, like schools as being stuck in the mud and not wanting to do this. There are real reasons for that. And so I think as vendors and as our platform, that's our job.
Yeah.
Our job is to make sure that transition actually happens.
Okay, so with that, Susan, so tell us about the process. Like from your perspective, you have a teacher, you have a school, you have the whole district needs something. And you know, again, for the purpose of this conversation, maybe keep it like within the context of edtech
you don't want to put
products.
everyone to sleep in the next 5 minutes?
Yeah, we don't want to talk about school buses and...
Sure. So to Daniel's point, it is about an 8-step process in traditional settings, right? And I want to give a little bit of context here that I think is really important. So Highline, we serve roughly 20,000 students. So we're not huge, but we're not super small. I think that's important because in a district of our size, we are big enough to achieve some economies of scale and to do things at scale, which can be cost efficient. But we're small enough that we can be a little more nimble than some of our larger colleagues that can really get bogged down in this. I will tell you that the procurement process, I'm going to be really honest with you, step by step, is not one that as a superintendent I pay a ton of attention to. I pay attention to it in the sense from a compliance standpoint, right? Because I know that, you know, keeping my district, you know, fiscally sound using taxpayer dollars is a critically important part of my job. But the reality is, the real mission and the reason I get up every morning and endure this job is for the sake of doing the work of educating children. And in this day and age, I will tell you what my priorities are on a daily basis are not the steps in a procurement process, but whether I am actually feeding, educating, and literally, not exaggerating in this day and age, keeping my children alive. And so a superintendent now has a lot on their plate, and so we are not going to get bogged down in this sort of thing. However, you know, I did have a long conversation with my CFO before coming here to sort of talk about this, and we both agree that there are things that we could do to make serious improvements. We have a centralized procurement process now, as most people do. We're not opposed to any kind of decentralized. I mean, I'm actually happy to look at those steps and say, and we have done some I think streamlining, not as much as we could. We're not wholesale opposed to decentralizing, but we've got to make sure that, again, we're holding ourselves accountable, right? Because I don't know if you all know, but our federal funds are audited almost annually by the state, and we don't have a say in that. We get a memo from the state auditor's office and says, congratulations, we'll be coming in to audit your Title I, Title III, et cetera. And I don't know if you all know this, we pay for that service. So we actually don't get to choose to be audited, but we do get to pay to be audited. So that was a super fun fact that I learned when I became a superintendent. So we have these individuals that are making sure that we're minding our P's and Q's. And as I was explaining to Karen and Daniel just before we walked in, they're not just looking from a procurement standpoint. They're making sure they're auditing us for both procedural and fiscal compliance. And they can find fault with both. And both can result in a finding. And as a superintendent in a school board, you want as few audit findings as possible. It impacts your district's ability to get good bond ratings and all that. I mean, there's real things attached here. That said, I think Highline is actually uniquely poised to do some innovation in this space for a couple of reasons. This is my 6th year as superintendent, which is almost like being a pink unicorn if you're in an urban district and you can be a superintendent for any extended period of time. I also have a really amazingly supportive school board, and our threshold to take contracts to the board is $250,000. That's pretty high by a lot of K-12 standards. And so we do have some flexibility and some range here and a high level of trust to do some things, but it falls so low on my day-to-day priority list, right? I just care that my team is keeping us clean, is keeping us, fiscally solvent, and is that we're not going to make the front page of the news with horrible audit findings. But I do think this is an important space for all of us to collectively come together and have a voice on, because it's not really the districts that we've got to put the pressure point on to change. It's really the federal and state regulations, right? And is there a space where we can all come together and challenge the rules and regs that are there for a reason? I mean, we are using taxpayer money. We have a responsibility to be responsible with those dollars. But I think that there's a case to be made that we could be using those dollars more efficiently, have better impact if we did things differently. And I don't think school districts can make that case alone to the people who are auditing us. But I wonder if they would hear that differently from, an Amazon or another person. So that's just a wondering and a challenge that I have for all of us moving forward. What could that look like?
Yeah, so that's awesome. And maybe setting that aside just a little bit, the changing regulations and changing, the actual legislation and regulations, like that seems perhaps a little far.
Daunting?
A little daunting, a little far afield from what we could potentially accomplish here. However, there are a lot of things within the context of what we can think about. So just specifically, let's just talk about a little bit about needs. Like, so when you are a district and you need to buy something in the education space for learning, how do you articulate what you need so that people can offer you products that might fulfill that? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, and it's really hard to strike the balance between sort of putting out there what I need and being told what I need by people coming to me. So if any of you, I hit delete on your email before coming here, I apologize. But as superintendents, we get a lot of solicitation from folks wanting to solve our problems, right? Which I appreciate. More of us solving these problems is better than one of us. But I think that what my job as the superintendent, because I am, and I say this in a nice way, a target for a lot of vendors who want to get access into the system, I have to always have a mind for what our needs are as a system, and both seek out those that I need, and when someone seeks me out, be really clear in saying, and these are hard conversations to have, you're really nice, but I don't need you right now. That's not the problem I'm trying to solve. And you have to learn how not to be too nice as a superintendent, which you learn fast. But the reality, though, is...
You don't say we can still be friends?
Sure we can, but you're not going to play in our district. Yeah. So I think it's sort of that push-pull between me seeking it out and then being sought out. But then I also have a really exceptional, highly functioning team in my district, and I have a lot of faith and confidence in them. And I don't pretend to be as good at their jobs as they are. I hire them to do their jobs. So I look at my job as superintendent, to be very honest with you, as almost being a broker, right? That sort of I get out there and I sort of broker the services, bring them in, but I let my people then talk with that person and make the determination, does this? So I say, I think this fills a need, but I need you to sit down with this person and figure it out. So it's I don't want to say it's a squishy process, but it's pretty informal. Yep. And I will say too, relationships matter. I think that getting to know vendors. I mean, when somebody comes in presuming to know what I need without asking, that's borderline offensive. And they're probably not going to get in there. But I also think that I think that we could collectively be a lot smarter in this space.
And have processes.
Yes.
Okay, so forgetting your current day jobs and who you work for and what you're doing, you all are super interested and kind of know a lot about this space. So think about innovation. Like if you know, what are the kinds of things that could happen or could be tested or tried or something that would serve to more efficiently and effectively get the right things to the right people at the right time? Thoughts on that?
I'll start.
Sure.
There are a lot of steps in the procurement process, as you know. We're focused maybe on two ends of it. You know, one being discovery.
Yep.
We are seeing this sort of push down. This, you know, so whether it's from the feds to the state to the district down, right? So we have more people making decisions, right? And at the same time, we've got this explosion in choices, right? I mean, orders of magnitude more options today than there were, you know, when this conference began. And so we're working hard to make sure that we can help support the state, the districts by providing it sort of a, you know, a common discovery experience that's aligned with Tennessee standards, right? And we think that's an important part of what we're doing. And then on the other side, it's not enough to just procure it. You've got to make sure it gets out and it works, that it gets to the right people at the right time and the way they need it can integrate. You know, interoperability is terrific and certainly helping the cause. We're not there yet, right? It's not, so we find that we've got lots of options that get out and get deployed and unfortunately not utilized to their fullest. So those are just a couple of things that we're trying to work
That's great.
on.
So way better discovery. That's huge. And I think there are companies trying to figure that out, how to publish things out, how to get things so you can compare one product to the next with regard to privacy or data use or interoperability or accessibility or all those kinds of things. So discovery is actually really, really interesting. And we can maybe come back to that. I know you were talking a little bit about the context. So how, when you want to find a product, what we found in our research study also is most superintendents, I'm using superintendents, kind of most district people when they want to purchase something, where do they get their information? They phone a friend, they ask somebody, they just, they ask people. The process for having very reliable information online has...
Yeah, how to share peer-to-peer
It's been peer-to-peer.
And
So that's
efficacy and all that to capture that in a way that's part of the discovery process.
Yeah.
Maybe just picking up on the flip side of the discovery coin, which is being discoverable.
Yeah.
How many investors in the room? Folks in the investor community? A few. When I talk to the edtech and education physical product companies, you kind of have two really unappealing choices to go to market in education. Door number one is work with a traditional company, a publisher, a technology reseller. We all know who the names are. And it's a very high cost of sale. And the efficiency and effectiveness of going to market through that channel is not always awesome. The other option is to build your own sales force. And that's really, really hard in K-12 because it's so fragmented and it's national and it's a very difficult problem to go build a K-12 sales force. And one of the big, I think, innovations that we see an opportunity for at Amazon is how do you create, and it has to be a two-sided marketplace, as John talked about. There has to be the discoverability there, as you just said. But how do you create a conduit for innovative products that are really from a value to a K-12 organization punching above their weight, but they don't have their earlier stage companies or their growth stage companies that have not scaled out or can't afford the cost of sale of some of these traditional distribution models, digital or physical. And that's a problem, kind of an innovation area that we're thinking a lot about. We've started something called Launchpad. that helps small, undiscovered companies get listed on Amazon Business. Amazon helps these smaller organizations function like they are a large multinational company by extending our distribution network and our marketing reach and the reach we have into K-12 decision makers at all levels, from teachers all the way up to the district level. And I think that's one of the really exciting innovations is how do you get, you have to have the discoverability, the discovery problem solved so you don't overwhelm decision makers. But how do we get better products in front of more people to make better informed decisions? I think that's part of the innovation.
Yep. Discoverability and being discovered so that the smaller, maybe newer entrants that might be awesome can actually get found. Others, other innovations, other things you've been thinking about that if somebody ought to do something?
Yeah, well, so there's, when you think about these purchase orders, right? So one of the schools that we're working with are using us for food services, right? And so because it's highly regulated, because they're taking federal dollars, they have to do everything through an RFP, right? So one of the things that we learned is that they actually do, almost every school district does this, but at the beginning of the year or once every 5 years, they'll actually choose their one national vendor. And the PO is worth roughly anywhere from $1 million to $10 million. And so because the process is so onerous, the school wants to only do this as minimal times as possible. So they'll sign a singular 5-year contract with a single vendor, right? Now, we know why, right? Like, the process is supposed to be fair and equitable, right? So there's this one window every 5 years. It's like that stinking cactus at the New York Botanical Garden, right? It opens up once every few years,
Awesome.
right? And you have this opportunity, right? Awesome, right? And then it closes for another 5 years, and that vendor has, like, again, it's food services. These are commodities, tomatoes, right? What happens, in the marketplace, like price variation, all of these things. So what ends up happening to that vendor if for some reason the bottom falls out?
And
right?
the regulations could change.
And the regulations can change, right? So, the innovation could simply be like, hey, there are actually, the world has progressed since, the dawn of the industrial age, where basically the purchase order process was to actually have raw materials ready to actually use in your factory, right? We don't like to use factories as a metaphor for what we do in schools, yet we purchase like it, right? So what are some of those innovations? And again, being a hammer, it's really a marketplace. If pricing, if availability, if those things are really the true measures as to why schools is what federal dollars really need to pay attention to. And this goes back to we need to get sort of the regulations to sort of think differently about it. The rest of the business world has figured out that there are better ways to find those efficiencies in purchasing. And so the innovation is actually not that, slap your forehead.
Yeah.
It's actually out there. It's pretty straightforward, and it's just really a question of how do we get those people who are in charge to just meet us in 2004.
Well, okay, and some of those things are also you're not going to get the best price when you do it that way, 5 years and that whole world.
And things change at light year speed now.
Right.
So, to be very honest with you, we just had a vendor a couple years ago that wanted us to sign, and this was in the teaching and learning space, not a sort of a commodity service like food or buses or anything. And they wanted us to sign on to a 5-year contract. And our policy is we don't do more than 2-year contracts.
Yeah.
And it's because things change so much, and our needs are going to change, and the regs do change.
Yeah.
I guess a wondering that I have as I listen to you talk, John, is, I actually think that sort of the open ed resource space, I think, is pushing on districts' traditional adoption processes. And I wonder if the rate of change and the marketplace itself could have a similar drive on the procurement process to force it to change.
Sure.
So districts are slow to respond to that, but this notion of getting these committees together of people to
Yeah.
look at materials, and then the board approves it, and it's as equally mind-numbing to the procurement process. But I think we're entering a space that's going to be very parallel in the procurement world, as is adoption.
No, I think we will. And I think what you'll see is that John brings up a great point. What we've done, the procurement innovation to date, has been to take the thing that was invented in the 1960s and digitize it. Like literally, that's been the big innovation. And now I think we have an opportunity to take technologies like marketplaces, like new distribution models, like more efficient supply chains, and actually go back to some of the regulators and go back to some of the legislators and decision makers and say, we're going to meet the needs of the spirit of this law. We're going to meet competition and ensuring the right processes are followed with federal, state, and local dollars. But we're going to do it in a fundamentally different way that encourages true competition, not the appearance of competition through a 5-year fixed price, fixed term contract. And I think what will happen there is you'll have not only better pricing, but I think you'll have better products because there'll be more competition. And that will help not just the commodity categories, it'll help the teaching and learning side as well.
Agreed.
So changing the subject a little bit to the much smaller incremental purchases, right? So there's I always picture kind of a 2x2, where if the risk goes up and the risk is measured as it's super expensive, or it's going to take a lot of time, or students are going to use it a lot, or something like that. If that goes up, you need more evidence, right? So if we start thinking about some of those things that are sort of more rapidly found by teachers and tried out quickly to see if they're going to make a difference or going to work. What have you seen? Have you seen anything work with teacher wallets or P cards, or having ways that teachers can quickly procure? And if you haven't seen it, could you make it up?
P cards are also the bane of a superintendent's existence because those get you in trouble super fast.
Yeah, that's like a credit. So it's like a credit card.
Procurement card. Yeah. So
card.
in fact, in talking with my CFO, we had issues with 40 P cards across our district just last week. Whether it's fraud, whether it's misuse, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that is a management issue.
Okay, let's set that aside. Forget the P cards. That's a bad idea.
Thank you.
But how about teacher wallets? So teachers have a certain amount of money that they can spend on things for their classroom, maybe through a marketplace or something like that. Has anybody seen that worked with that kind of thing, or can you imagine how that could work?
Well, frankly, Donors Choose is making that work, right? So teachers are putting their needs out there and getting the funding for whatever it is they need. And sometimes that's devices, sometimes it's materials, sometimes it's services. So I would argue that's already happening pretty widely.
Well, except that they are reliant on someone else
Outside.
to
Correct.
provide the money
Correct.
at
Yes.
some random time,
Yes.
so that it's not really it's it's absolutely fantastic.
I think the challenge is traditionally, the classic challenge here is a trade-off between choice and compliance. So if we let out the rope on a credit card or a procurement card that's in a teacher's hot hand, yes, they're the good actors, and the vast majority are good actors, are going to buy the right things that they need for their classroom just in time. They're going to buy it off Amazon. They're going to use Donors Choose. They're going to go to a local store. But then there's this compliance and adherence to policy trade-off. And so I think one of the things that we've worked with districts to do is how do we kind of throw a net around that unmanaged, that rogue, that maverick spending, that spending where it creates risk, and put oversight, compliance, detailed data, and workflow approval processes at the right levels that are still super quick. They don't slow the innovation in the classroom down. And that's really been, I think, what's fueled the growth of Amazon Business is whether it's a purchase card or a PO, it doesn't really matter what the payment method is. The point is that the teacher has decision-making authority
At a level.
at a certain level.
Yeah.
At a certain level, particularly for commodity items. We'll talk about the more complex stuff, I'm sure, here in a minute. But to really be able to give that teacher that choice and that freedom and that autonomy, but at the same time ensure that there's the right oversight and compliance. I think that's where the technology, and it's not just Amazon that's doing it, there's others that are doing it as well, but I think we've been able to do it at scale across a lot of different commodity categories, across a lot of different K-12 districts.
And do any of you think about how to present the information about whether the product is useful? So when someone purchases it, is there a way of feeding that information back in so that whether it's whatever it is that somebody purchases, there's a way of getting the system smarter and smarter so the next person that comes by will have more information about the product and whether it worked in a certain context?
So we have options. It's early, but we have options, depending on how the school district wants to implement a technology product, we have, an LRS we can support, to the degree that products are XAPI compliant, can report back engagement, and we provide reporting back to the districts around that. But again, it depends on some of that, interoperability and ensuring that the products are reporting back. I mean, that's one of the big challenges, all these different solutions, whether it's just getting engagement data back or, just basic things like
Even usage
getting
data,
grade information back into the SIS.
Yeah.
I mean, all these things are still real kind of challenges. So we've got our toe in that water.
So to name two other companies, just because
Sure.
this isn't a commercial for
Nope,
procurek12.com. So I think Class Wallet, what Jamie is doing, is doing great work. I think that it solves a lot of the P card problems because it's actually making sure that the flow of data goes along with each transaction so that that piece is done. So that's at the very front of the funnel. I think Alloview, what Jess is doing is really interesting and important.
Yeah.
Like, she's just not saying, hey, here's the data, you go clean it up. Here are the reports that actually show you information about how you're doing and where your areas of improvement are. I think all of those, I think the two things that tie them together and tie what we're trying to accomplish together, as well as what will then help you, is not just to make sure that there's this constant flow of data that ties it all together, but then the service that goes along with it to process that data.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, this isn't top of mind for you. It's really more, I just don't want to lose my, again, it's in terms of where things are important. And by the way, we all think that prioritization makes sense.
Thank you,
You
John.
should, yeah, of course. But recognizing that that's actually not top of mind for you, then what are those additional services that then make your job easier and simpler, and then takes that data and allows you to do actionable, tasks against them.
And I do want to say, too, that when we talk about, giving teachers more of that autonomy and freedom to purchase and do things, I actually have no fears or worries about giving them that autonomy. I even don't worry a ton about the potential for fiscal mismanagement, which is there. There's also the very real reality that a teacher goes out and does something that the district can't support, right? So they go out and purchase, whether it's a service, a product, or something that the district doesn't have the capacity to support in whatever way it needs to, and then they're incredibly frustrated, right? And it's money down the drain because, so we have that complexity that we have to throw into the mix as well.
Yeah, that's tricky.
Sorry, one really small analogy. So we were talking to a charter school network, and it had turned out that their CFO that sort of looked at the books realized that they had spent over $100,000 paying taxes on small items that they didn't need to, that they were tax exempt from. And that was just simply because their people were going out and buying things because it was needed, right? So, that's just a really small example of how not top of mind this is, but the controls to put in place are, again, not rocket surgery.
Yeah.
Like, it really is fairly straightforward in terms of being able to save some dollars.
Just one thing on following up on this P card discussion. There's an interesting parallel that we have visibility to at Ingram, and that's in the library space. And I'm really referring, we're not that large in K-12 libraries, but in the public library space, traditionally very bureaucratic kind of processes, limited number of vendors that do a lot of specialty, we're one of them, do a lot of specialty work around the book, the Mylar jacket and the stickers and just all sorts of things that would say it's only a limited number of folks that can supply that. Well, increasingly, we've really seen decision-making flow almost all the way down, often to the patron. And so we now have something called patron-driven adoption, where basically the patrons choose. And they're pulling from funds, right? And Amazon's one of the beneficiaries of this, and we're seeing that the libraries will now go, because they want the speed, they want to serve their markets.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that helps police that, if you will, is ultimately they've got data. They've got the circulation data. They know how effective their purchasing is because they can watch and see to what extent their patrons are leveraging that content. But they've gone all the way down, again, to allowing patrons, citizens, basically, to determine what should be bought.
And that is super interesting. Last topic, really quickly. So Education Superhighway published a whole website where you can find out how much people are paying for broadband in other places, right? So it's like a total transparency play. Let's just publish it out. They got all the information from E-rate, paper was, and they got boxes shipped and whatever. So what role does transparency of product pricing play with respect to procurement? So if you can see what other people are paying, like what happens there, and is anybody thinking about that?
Yeah, I think Hal Freelander, former CIO of New York City DOE, has done some great work in this space. Yeah, I think the fundamental concept of an efficient marketplace, which is, I think, sort of this concept that we're getting at, is transparency.
Yeah.
It's the bedrock of an efficient marketplace. And inefficiency takes many forms in K-12. Let's just talk about, we talked about efficacy, just talk about utilization.
Yes, just is a product that's purchased being
Is it even being used?
Yeah.
And it's a huge topic in digital products. It's equally a problem in physical products. We did I saw this in one school and I didn't believe it, so we commissioned a study. 12% of non-salaried budgets in K-12 school districts, not all, there's many that are run very well, but are sitting in surplus rooms for an average of 3 years unused. If you look at the top 1,000 school districts, that's on average $3.6 million of stuff that sits unused every year. And it's because of part of the lack of transparency of where the need comes from, where the demand comes from, what the price is.
Yeah.
These pricing arbitrage games that many organizations play, selling into K-12, drive that kind of behavior. And also the budgeting, and I love what Alavi's doing in budget management and aligning budgets to strategy so you don't have to guess. I think these are innovations that will drive transparency in pricing and transparency in utilization.
Yeah. Any last parting thoughts? Anybody else? Did we solve it? No, we did not solve it.
I think what we agreed is that John's got the portal. You're going to ship the tomatoes and the janitorial supplies, and we'll deal with the instructional materials.
All right, there you go. So I don't know if we solved it, but we definitely uncovered a lot of ideas. Definitely keep track of all of these people who are working on different parts of it, whether it is the information and the exposure to the evidence, it's the information about products, who else is using it. Like there's a lot of information, transparency on that, transparency on pricing, utilization data, interoperability. There are all of these kinds of things that are all sort of inching along. And as we kind of push these things forward, I think we all will hopefully have a better procurement experience and then a better utilization experience in our classrooms. But please join me in thanking the panel.
And Karen, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.